Welcome to the Regen Brands podcast. This is a place for brands, retailers, investors, and other food system stakeholders to learn about the consumer brands supporting regenerative agriculture and how they're changing the world. This is your host, Kyle, joined by my co-host, AC, who's going to take us into the episode.
On this episode, we have John Strohfus, who is the founder and CEO of Field Theory and Minnesota Hemp Farms Incorporated. John is supporting regenerative agriculture as a row crop farmer managing 1,000 acres in Minnesota by working as a broker and supply chain builder with multiple brands and by selling CPG products in the Field Theory brand that contain regeneratively grown ingredients. In this episode, John educates us on what really matters to farmers. He gives his take on conventional regenerative versus regenerative organic, and he breaks down what it takes to find, aggregate, and broker regenerative ingredients for other brands. This was a super fascinating conversation and a great one to start the new year. John's three-pronged perspective as a farmer, broker, and brand builder really unlocked some amazing insights, and we're pumped to have him join us and hope you learn as much as we did. Let's go. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Regen Brands podcast. Very excited today to kick off the new year with our first recording of the new year with John from Field Theory. So welcome, John.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. Great way to start the year.
Yeah, we're super excited, and I'm particularly excited because I ask the same question every single episode, and this time I get to do it a little bit differently. So this is totally novel for me. So I'm super pumped. So John, you are both, I guess, you're many things, but you are representing a brand today, an ingredient supplier, and a farmer. So most of the listeners are going to be unfamiliar with all three of those entities. So if you can, give us a quick lay of the land of each one. What is Field Theory, the brand? What sort of products do you have? Where can people find you today? What sort of ingredients do you supply to other businesses? And what do you actually grow on the farm?
Okay, lots of questions. I can do everything but your taxes. How about that?
Okay. Well, I mean, it's tax season, so I could use the help. But if you want to start with the other things, that's why you're here.
Yeah. So, from a traditional CPG perspective, Field Theory has some baking mixes, and then we have some hemp products. And those baking mixes are made with hemp. They're also made with upcycled food ingredients, spent grain, number one. And those lines, along with the hemp part lines, are really our 3 and 4 hero products. And we're in about 500 to 600 stores right now. We just got to add with a grouping of Kroger stores. So we'll be adding about 350 stores just after the first of the year here. We're making product actually right now. So that's kind of a great way to start 2025.
Yeah.
And then on the ingredient side, we're serving up buckwheat, sunflower kernel. We're doing some wheat. We're working with some sorghum. Pretty much, anything that comes my way, we're opportunistically, we're taking a serious look at. And really that's the focus of that. As a food ingredient company, Field Theory is helping brands connect with a more intimate supply chain and one that's focused on regenerative sourcing. Not all of our ingredients are regenerative sourced because we have, mass commodity plays that come our way as well. But for brands that are looking for value add, purposeful sourcing, that's why they're coming to Field Theory versus other suppliers.
Mm-hmm. Totally makes sense. Love that you're doing that work and excited to dig into that a little bit more. I think that covers the relatively of a doozy first question I threw your way. So, I mean, it's a great at bat and I appreciate that. I'm curious, you mentioned spent grains for the baking mixes, correct?
Correct.
Can you elaborate a little bit more about what does it mean to be a spent grain?
Yeah, so basically, breweries are taking wheat and oats and Kernza, which I know you guys are connected in with a bunch of information on Kernza, which is a great regenerative grain. Those are being used in the manufacturing of beer and spirits, and that mash is essentially usually discarded after the fermentation process, and it might go into livestock feed, it might just go to landfill. And we are working with a great company that I actually invested in about 4 years ago called Net Zero. Sue Marshall, Minnesota connection here, great company with Net Zero. They built some proprietary technology to recapture not only spent grain, but other products too, like collagen from eggshells and things like that. So really in the food waste reduction, upcycling movement. But with respect to our products and the spent grain, so the spent grain goes in as a wet mash essentially, and it gets dried, and there's a kill log, five-step kill log process, 5-log kill step process, sorry. And that comes out, and then we mill that in with our wheat and then blend it with our other products. And that goes into the upcycled baking mixes. And one of the benefits of not only food waste reduction, but it's a water reduction because we're using less wheat. We are, subjugating or avoiding the water consumption used to grow those acres of wheat.
Totally. And I guess from like a total food utilization perspective as well, we talk about, we have to be able to grow as much food and caloric capacity to feed the world, where if you can take a food that's used once a second time for the same caloric benefit, like that's another awesome reason to do this, spent grain upcycled food movement.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. Hell yeah. I love it. One of many, many things we're excited to dive into today. And I'm pumped to have you on, John. We've been connected for a while, following each other on LinkedIn, and been kind of long awaiting this conversation. John is a farmer himself, like Kyle mentioned. He helps brands with supply chain and ingredient sourcing, and he has his own brand. So we really feel like you have a super unique perspective, like the exact kind of perspective we want to be uplifting on this show. But John, take us back. Like, how did this all get started? Did you start farming first originally? For those that don't know, John's in Minnesota. So just to throw that out there, did you start the brand and then the farm and then the ingredient sourcing? Like, what was the chronology of all this, and what's the origin story?
Yeah, well, I just had my 50th birthday a couple months ago.
Hey,
happy birthday.
Yeah, thank you. I'm still alive and kicking. And someday I'll let you know what I want to be when I grow up. So I say that kind of jokingly, but I have always been, entrepreneurial ever since I was a kid. I remember being 10 years old and started a very, very, very small driveway seal coating business. So, seal coat on the neighbor's driveway, and I think I got paid $15, and they supplied the stuff.
Yeah.
So, that's sort of how I was always wired. But our farm, when I was growing up as a kid, my dad worked full-time off farm. He was an executive at Coca-Cola. We kind of joke about Coca-Cola built our farm, and it's about a 100-acre farm, and we've had horses. So we had horses our whole life, and agriculture is very central around us, and we grew hay for our own horses, but we didn't row crop farm. My dad was a South Dakota farm kid, so I feel like I'm second, third generation farmer, depending how you, count. But my neighbors, up until a couple years ago, they would say John's not a farmer.
Yeah.
So that's sort of how I was brought up. I never thought I would be in agriculture. I definitely never thought I'd be in the food industry.
Yeah.
I was a sales guy, an entrepreneur, right? So I went off to school, and I was a marketing major and a microcomputer minor. And then I graduated. I spent about 19 years in the IT industry working for Accenture, the global consulting company. Got to see, a lot of things, lead a lot of teams, do a lot of different cool things, and also learn about business. But I never thought that those things would be part of what I'm doing today. And like a lot of things, my dad passed, and I had to figure out what are we going to do with the family farm. And I was growing less and less interested in my IT career. And about that time, we had the opportunity to grow hemp in 2016. So my dad passed 2008. I took over the farm in 2010. And then I started looking at our farm and, how can we do things differently? We had a bunch of horse boarding still. We have 60 horses that we board to this
Wow.
day. That's a full-time job for most. My wife kind of runs that business now. And, it was just like looking at it like as a new business, something that,
Mm-hmm.
your dad used to own and now you own it. What are you going to do? How are you going to make it better?
Right.
And I started that entrepreneurial process, right? So we had friends that bought beef cattle and we'd go in on that. And then they said, well, why don't you just have the 5 head of beef on your own farm?
Yeah.
Well, that made sense. So then we started doing that. And now, we sell beef to about 40 customers, direct sourced.
Hmm.
So things just kind of evolved. And then in 2016, I was looking for, I took all our rented land back. So we started operating that ourselves. And then hemp came along in 2016 as the first opportunity to do that in Minnesota.
Right.
I knew nothing about hemp, absolutely totally ignorant. I'm not ashamed to admit that I didn't know anything
But
about hemp.
typical IT guy, you wanted to do something that was new and cutting edge, John.
Yeah, right. And I just said I want to be the first person to do it. And I don't know if that was a little bit of ego or just younger energy or what, but I just knew that people really great things happen when you are the first to do them. Mm-hmm. And certainly I wasn't the first to grow hemp ever, but since the 1950s, yes. And so I just said, let's grow hemp. Let's see if we can market it. Let's see if we can get some processors online to process it for us and take the Canadian model and sell bulk hemp food, 100% food focused. Never had any CBD, things in, of interest at the time. And CBD really wasn't big. Certainly, not where we're at with cannabis at large right now. And then I said, so we created Minnesota Hemp Farms Incorporated. And I said, I want to have a brand also and put this on the shelf, shelf. And in that first 12 months, we created the brand Field Theory. We did all the logo work. And really just a real small team of people I knew or got introduced to. And we did it. So we we grew it, we put it in a bulk bag and offered it for sale to, brands if they wanted it. And we put it in our own brand. And, I wasn't in a lot of stores, but I had the product and I could sell it. And, then we started knocking down doors. And again, I didn't know anything about the food industry. So I learned all about food safety and all the hard knocks, essentially in that first year. Obviously, still learn more every day about those sorts of things. But that was the genesis, was hemp. And then now, two things happened. One, we started being asked to grow other crops. John, can you grow this on your own farm? And I said yes to that. The other thing that happened was I started working with a good friend of mine to farm more land, and we rented more land. And now, as of today, we're farming about 1,000 acres. Wow. About 100 of that is organic. And that's on my own farm here. Most of the land that we operate is rented. And so we grow, corn, soybeans, alfalfa, and then in organic, we're growing sunflowers, red beans, buckwheat, sorghum, as I mentioned. Anyway, I'm getting a little off track, but we started growing. We started operating a farm, at a bigger scale. And then in the food business, customers started asking more about what we could grow and be in that direct trade supply chain for them. And then they also, it's totally backwards. I'm not ashamed to say, our customers started asking us about regenerative. And I was like, what's regenerative, right? I mean, I know what sustainability is, and we heard, sustainability and that for a long time, but, that term was actually really new to me. And I was farming.
So about when did people start to ask you about regenerative? Like what? Give us a year if you can.
I would say, a lot of it stemmed from our work with the Simple Mills Sunflower Program. So the organic, regenerative, direct trade Simple Mills program was the first, and we're coming up on, I think it's year 5 of that is our next production year. 5 or 6 actually now. So,
So circa 2019,
5 years
2020
ago.
is when you're starting to get some inquiries about regen.
Yeah, exactly. And, I loved it. I'm like, oh, okay, I get this. It's, sustainability applied essentially more directly at the farm level. That's kind of how I interpret it. And I said, yeah, we can do these things. And some of those things we had done some of those things already, like with cover cropping. But we looked at it and started to do more. And then I said, aha, this is how Field Theory Foods is going to be able to get their foot in the door and differentiate ourselves from, I'll call them the bigs. If you want, wheat flour or whatever, you go to an Ardent Mills or a Bay State or something like that. If you want something that's really special, unique, with transparency to it, you come to us. And so that was sort of the model that, and nothing against those companies, by the way, they're great companies, and I hope they buy some product from us on the wholesale side. That was the difference. How are we going to be? We're not going to be always the cheap commodity play, and there's no money to be made really in that unless you're moving millions and millions of pounds. So
Right.
how can you offer something that's a higher value?
Oh, yeah.
Did I answer that? Was that one question?
No, man, that was great. I mean, you're doing a lot, so it was going to be a long answer, and I think you tied it all together really well and made a ton of sense to me. I mean, you're clearly wearing a lot of hats, but as we've seen like over and over again in all of this work, like the interconnectedness, whether it's the same person or different people of these various stakeholders when we're trying to build these regenerative supply chains, like they have to be way more connected and way more aligned. And I think you're a great example of that. And it's so cool. Like we got to get Simple Mills on the pod. We haven't had them on yet, but they're definitely on the list and we will. But even though they have very few regenerative products with like actual regenerative claims, they've done some really amazing work with people like yourself and really standing up regenerative supply sheds, like especially up in your neck of the woods in Minnesota. And for those that have listened to the Pacha bread episode, John is the farmer that helped them stand up that buckwheat supply chain that we talked about in that episode. So yeah, man, really cool. Made a ton of sense and just love what you're doing.
Yeah, Pacha is huge, right? That was a game changer, getting us into buckwheat, and hats off to those guys because that was just a whole new opportunity for us to bring in other growers in our network as well.
Well, John, I'm really curious to get your take on. I mean, you obviously farm literally a variety of different plants. You're playing in both commoditized conventional spaces and regenerative and organic, and all those different cross sections. So, number one, how do you manage that from an on-farm perspective? How do you feel about it? We'll start there. We'll just start there before I ask you like a 9-pronged question. So, like, what is it like managing that on-farm, and how do those practices differ? And how do you keep it all segregated and identity preserved?
Yeah. So from an on-farm perspective, you have to think about we didn't row crop farm until about 7 years ago. So literally, the plight of the farmer, I consider myself, I can easily put myself in the shoes of a young and emerging farmer. If you're 18 to 25 years old and you're sitting there going, what do I want to do when I grow up? And you go, I want to be a farmer, right? That's almost at the level like that we were at, because yes, we had some infrastructure, we had some tractors and equipment. It was all small and it wasn't, purpose built for row crop corn and soybeans. So that's a whole maybe different podcast about some challenges that we have in the ag industry and how, I just said I turned 50, how people younger than me are going to survive. I think regenerative is a great swim lane for that. But our farm didn't really have the infrastructure, so we actually rent, storage space from a neighbor, retired farmer. I send a lot of our specialty stuff, from the organic side that goes straight to the processor as fast as we can. They maintain that identity preservation and segregation for us. And then honestly, we're a lot of mostly conventional on the traditional farming side, and there's not a lot of food ingredients that's coming from the conventional side right now. So that's, what I like to do is talk a lot about this organic versus conventional, because we only have so much organic land. I would move almost all of our corn and soybeans into the specialty crops if I had direct trade buyers for those commodities. So the short answer is we don't have to do a lot of separation on farm because we don't have a lot of these specialty products. We have most of them in the organic system, which is a smaller footprint. It's easier to manage. And then, we're out contracting and working with our farmer friends who I've known a long time and get to know more every day. So that's the source. And then we're working in the identity preservation from each of those farms.
And John, just the organic premium, even on the commodity side, isn't enough for you to transition the 900 acres of like conventional to organic, even if it's just non-food grade like commodity corn and soy?
So every farm is different and unique, and we farm 20 miles outside of Minneapolis. So we're urban farmers. So we have, we've got fields that are, 8 acres, 5 acres, 15 acres, and there's 2 or 3 houses that we have to contour farm around. A huge pain, frankly. So people say, how much do you farm? I said, not a lot of acres, lots and lots of fields. Like I think.
Right, your acres to field ratio could be improved.
Yeah, so like on 1,000 acres, we probably have 40 to 45 fields. Our large field is 120 acres, and it's split between water runs and tree grows and creeks. So it's still not a cohesive tract of land. Unlike farther south in the state, north in the state, west in the state, out of the metro area, where you can drive a tractor in a straight line for a half mile or a mile, turn around, come back. So the efficiency level is much higher.
Yeah.
Yep. So and also it's rented ground. So trying to talk about cover cropping and regenerating soils that you have a 1-year lease or even a 3-year lease is really, really hard. So we would still love to do more of this, but it comes back to the customer who wants to buy, whether it be sunflower or wheat or buckwheat or sorghum from a conventional farm grown in a regenerative manner. Then as soon as I get that, yes, then we're converting acres over. But it's also access to markets, and we live right on the Mississippi River, so our corn and soybeans go on the river down south to New Orleans, most of them.
Yeah, I'm really curious to get your take on this. As both a brand and a supplier and a farmer, you mentioned you were hoping to see more demand for conventional, non-organic, regenerative product. When customers are coming to you and asking for something like this, are they attaching any sort of a certification to that ask? Or is it just, hey, can you implement these regenerative systems? Are they relying on you to tell them what is and isn't regenerative? Like what does all of that look like?
Kyle, are you ready for the long answer again?
Well, it sounds like not enough people are asking him for that in general is the first problem.
That's the first problem. People aren't asking for that because they're programmed now, I think, with regenerative organic certified. That's like what has, from the buyer's perspective in these brand companies, larger or small, regenerative is better and I want it certified. So then it's ROC. I just go back to, you can have philosophical differences about what's best for the planet, what's best for our soil. But this is what I like to have people keep in perspective. Organic is 1% to 2% of the world's farming production. The rest of it is done in the conventional manner. So do you want to make if you think organic is the best, do you want to make regenerative organic would be the best. If you think organic is second best, wouldn't you rather focus on 98% of the world's soils and make them a little bit better than taking 2% of a good practice and making it better? I mean, you can make it really simple, right? A plus is you use a cover crop, a negative is you use a chemical. So are you doing less tillage? That's a plus. Are you using cover crops? That's a plus. Do you have a new customer so you can grow another crop? That's a plus. Oh, you're still using a chemical? Yes. Okay, that's a negative. but are you using less of that chemical than you did because you're able to do this other stuff? Bam, you got another plus. So that's 4 pluses and 1 minus in conventional. If you go into the organic system, and it's actually not that significant because a lot of these practices are being done already, and the scale is just so much larger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that was maybe one or two answers, and then what certification? Again, I mentioned ROC. Nothing wrong with ROC, but it's regenerative focused only, and the one that we have sort of worked most closely with is the Soil Climate Initiative. Number one, because they were created with a lot of farmer input for the framework. So, and then they're open to conventional certifications as well as organic. And probably the most important thing as a farmer, it doesn't cost me anything to get into that program like some of the other programs that have like a $3,000 or $4,000 cost of entry, plus all the paperwork and so forth. And it's also it's aspirational. So it's saying I'm going to baseline you where you're at today, and then I'm going to measure you, and you're making a commitment to do these things. And we're going to measure and make sure that you are doing those things. But it's not like some of the others where they're saying you have to do this or you're not regenerative. That turns a lot of farmers off. So I think SCI in that sense is much more open. I'll say it that way. And then Regenerified's out there too, and I think they're got more of the soil climate type of mindset than ROC. But there's a lot of them out there right now, and it's not that one's better than the other. It's how do we kind of make sense of this? And when a customer comes to us looking for Regenerified or ROC, can we talk to them when we have Soil Climate Initiative verified and convince them that these are very similar? So unless what is their point of differentiation, and is that really important to the brand and that buyer?
Yeah, tons of good stuff for us to unpack. And just a audience note, we've talked about the Soil and Climate Initiative before, and we've often abbreviated it as SCI, and it actually used to be called the Soil Carbon Initiative, but they've updated the name.
Right.
And the actual seal on pack is the Soil and Climate Health Initiative Verified seal, which there's not a ton out there yet in the marketplace, but there is some of the brands that we've had on, like Pacha and Roots Potato Chips, and I know more on the way. And we love the work that the SCI crew is doing. And like you said, John, they're really going after, being inclusive and aspirational, which we feel like we need. And it's not an either or conversation. It's like everyone we just talked about, we need all of them to do good work and to succeed. And we need to make sure there's a pathway for all of them, and that the market can, activate different pathways, right?
Yep.
I'm still not super convinced that the consumer is going to be able to fully understand and articulate all of those pathways. But if we could get the consumer to understand just the umbrella of regenerative and let those all sit underneath that umbrella, I think that's possible. But it's super interesting to hear you kind of speak to it with all your different perspectives. And, it's almost like I'm hearing you say it really is the brand and the customer demand, right? Having that customer, that is the initial impetus of what can you do overall, which, is confirmation bias for us, but it's very validating, because it's like, that's why we started this whole podcast. Was we can talk to our blue in the face about farmers adopting practices, but if no one's going to pay them for it, and if they can't send the product anywhere, like it doesn't matter. And you're another good example of there's a reason why you're farming 1,000 acres and only 100 of it is organic with regenerative practices and 900 of it is conventional with regenerative practices, because
and I live it, right? So if anybody would be doing more of it, it would be me. And so I think that hopefully for the listeners, that raises some eyebrows, because the farmers want to do this. I was just at, I was also, I'm doing one other thing. I was elected to the Minnesota Soil Health Coalition board of directors. And we just had the big soil health event a couple months ago. And I was telling some of my brand friends, I said, can you focus some on the next 2 years on conventional regenerative sourcing, because I'm in a room with like 500 farmers, and there's not one of them here that really wants to continue growing standard conventional corn and soybeans. None of them. And I said,
John, why? Why is that? Why don't farmers want to continue to grow those things?
because we're going broke. I'm, I don't know what the specific number is, but we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars of loss in the 24 crop year. High inputs, low prices, and unless you're a marketing whiz who's smarter than me, you're going to get sandwiched in that, and you're going to lose money. So the farmer, is talked about, makes money in 2 out of a 5-year cycle.
Wow.
I don't know how many people are that disciplined with their own bank accounts to lose money for 3 years and then save it all in the 2 when they hit the lotto. So there's a lot of problems in the farm production, and they want to grow. They don't want government payments. They want to grow a crop, whether it's corn, soybeans, or any specialty crop, for a market price that pays them a decent rate of return for what they're doing. All the food brands, you can relate to cost of goods. The farmer, what we do, right? In food brands, we say, hey, what's all the stuff to make my stuff? And yeah, I'm going to shave a few pennies here and whatever. And I get to my, $2 a unit. And then, let's see, I want to make 50% margin. And then, cause I got discos, promos, et cetera, but I know I need to make at least 25%. Or I can't. The farmer's like, okay, I need to buy all this stuff. I go buy it. I plant it, and now I harvested it, and I know how much I have, which I had not a lot of control on how much I have, what my yield is, and my product I made. And then, hey, what day is it, and now how much are you willing to pay for it? And that might be totally upside down from when you started the growing process. And so, most people don't understand how sandwiched the farmer is in that life cycle. And so anything that they can do to diversify, even if it's only 10% of their production, they're looking to try it. They want the market. And so that's another huge thing that we do, is we bring markets to these farms that don't have those markets today. Best example, 100 miles south of me, there's 3 growers that are growing sunflowers. They're growing some for the Simple Mills program. They're growing some more for the 7 Sundays program, which is another huge brand committed to regenerative. And they have absolutely no market. There's nobody in the 5 adjacent counties that are growing sunflower. So we brought that market to them. And the reason we did it is because they're doing the practices in a regenerative manner, and our brands wanted to meet and talk to and go on those farms and see how their stuff is made. And that's why we're sourcing from them. And they're also getting a little bit of a premium for that too.
That all totally makes sense. I want to kind of double back to the original question. You mentioned farmers are going broke, so they don't want to continue to grow these super commoditized crops because they're stuck in that sandwich you described. Have you noticed in your own farming, when you start to adopt regenerative principles on a conventional land, does that eventually lead to like a reduction in inputs? Like, does the soil actually rebound and require less input to make it a little bit more profitable?
I'm going to give you the honest answer to that. I think because there's a lot of, I could give you the rah answer. Yeah. The truth is that I don't think we have enough data around that. I can tell you anecdotally what I believed before, when we just had hay acres that were in hay production for 5 or 6 years, and then my neighbor who rented from us, my dad, put it back in corn and soybeans. That corn is always the best after alfalfa. And so, that's crop rotation, crop diversity. That's a tenet from farming from yesteryear. That is still true today. Why is it true? Okay, this diversity aspect of it. So, crop rotation is almost like a regenerative principle now, akin to cover cropping. But I asked some other farmers in the neighborhood who are using rye as cover crops in the corn and bean rotation. And I said, tell me how much I can save and convinced my farming partner that if we just started cover cropping with rye, we can use less nitrogen on our corn. And he said, well, I don't really think so. He said, because the rye takes some nitrogen, so you're going to have to actually maybe put more synthetics in, but you're getting the organic matter. So you're getting that nutrient cycling is happening. So if you take a longer term view, your soil is going to be overall more healthy and be able to do more with less inputs and more for itself. The other huge thing that I want people to know is that farmers are always going to chase yield.
Mm-hmm.
You always, as a brand, want the highest gross sales, the most stores. You're always going to chase that. And, people know that now, it's not all about the store number. It's about how much money you made in those stores versus how much money you lost in those stores. The same is true with yield. So we're always chasing 200 bushel, maybe even 300 bushel corn in certain areas, but we actually might make more money at 180 bushel corn with less inputs. But farmers that are, in it to win it, so to speak, they might start to do all these cover crop things, and they might still put on as much synthetic fertilizer or more because it's exponentially boosting yield. So companies and brands that are interested in measuring from an input reduction perspective, I think they might be disappointed in that story because farmers are going to do what they do to make more money. It's not to say that we're doing worse for the soil. We're still doing better for the soil, but inputs in the conventional system could still be at a plateau or increase a little bit.
Man, I super appreciate that response because it's not at all what I was anticipating to hear. And it was so informative. Like it's so eye opening to hear like the realities of what's actually taking place on farm. So I just appreciate you educating us.
I do think though, to put the happy face on it for the others that are listening who are disappointed maybe with the more direct answer, in a lot of cases, I do think that those inputs will go down because in certain areas, the soils can only produce certain height of yields, and they're just going to overall be doing their work with nutrient cycling better. So if we have those covers, we have new crops that we're rotating in and out. Yes, you could get, if you wanted the same yield, I believe in using those practices, you over time would be able to reduce your inputs. One of the hugest input reductions I see in the conventional side is in the chemical side, because the fungicides, pesticides, herbicides, those are going to be different needs. And in some cases, fungicide actually problems might increase because we're introducing early on a bunch of new bugs and things like that in the soil. So some of our corn that we grow might be actually more susceptible early on to some of those things. So there's a little bit of balance back and forth, but I think generally speaking, chemical usage will go down significantly with these practices.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating and it's super nuanced. I guess if I tried to summarize it into as short as possible, it's like we have early data that isn't super robust that long-term regenerative systems make input reductions happen and increase farm profitability, but it's obviously not convincing enough data or robust enough data to where we have every farmer out there adopting it, right? But that's almost separate from the annual decision that you will have to make as a farmer, which is I still have to go somewhere with this crop. So if I'm going to no-till, if I'm going to cover crop, if I'm going to reduce inputs, if I'm going to do whatever, I still have to sell this for a number that doesn't completely lose my ass or I can make some money on. So it sounds like there's times where that decision is linked and there's times where that decision is like not really linked, right? And in the shorter term, it's probably less linked, and then over the longer term, it's more linked. But I'm sure.
I think in a lot of ways, we as people, I'm a data guy too. Like I would love to know way more about what's going on than I do, and I'd like to see the report and drill into it, right, and draw anecdotal relationships. I think though, as people, we seek too much data sometimes. It is a lot of we're working with nature. It is a lot of art. It's like informed science, right, or informed art. and there are Facebook groups across the country and the world. One of them is Tillage Kings, and I can tell you that the folks in Tillage Kings, there's no tillers in there. There's guys with the moldboard plow still. There's hardcore regenerative cover croppers in there. I'm in there, and we're all trying to learn. So they're asking these questions, and there's farmers that are 75 years old in there, and there's farmers that are 20 years old in there, and they're saying the opposite information. So how can that be true? How can they both be saying something and it's completely opposite? Like the sky is blue. No, it's not. It's white or it's brown or whatever. So each farm's different. Each practice is different. If you no-till for 3 years, you might have more compaction than you did when you started no-till. Okay, we don't like to talk about that. So then do we plow it up or do we use more covers to get rid of the compaction? Those are both choices to make at year 3 if you're no-tilling and you have compaction. And one is a faster fix, and you might have to do that on your farm for the economics of it, and then you get back to no-till. Or you can take a longer view with the cover crop because you've got the ability to graze cattle. So some people have those options, some people don't. And we shouldn't get so prescriptive, I guess, is a summary. Like, you need to do it this way. And I've heard leaders of large brands before a group of farmers say, we're not going to tolerate the farmer not doing it the right way. And I was really off put by that. And I think they made a huge mistake because there is no one right way.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's an interesting segue into something I'm super curious about. And I think we haven't really talked about on an episode, John, and I'd love for you to shed some light on it, which is the ingredient sourcing and supply chain development side. Like, maybe not every single detail, but could you walk us through, like, you get the call from Pacha and they're like, hey, we need an organic buckwheat supply chain that also has a regenerative certification. Then what happens? Do you start growing some? Do you call farmers? Do you have your own processing facility? Do you have to find a facility? Like, how does it work from a timeline perspective? Like, just give the listeners a peek into like how these transactions and supply chains like actually come together. I think that'd be a super unique perspective to share, if you don't mind.
Yeah. I think let me give you 2 examples. So help me remember the second one. I'll start with Pacha because you brought it up, and then I'm going to give you. I'm just going to say a super large retailer who does a lot of private label.
Okay. To remain nameless.
Yes. Gotta cover those NDAs. Pacha was great, right? So they called and they said, hey, we got, connected to you, and, we are doing this. We're sourcing, buckwheat bread, and we want this to be regenerative certified. And so the good news is I had grown buckwheat on my own farm a couple years ago versus like when Simple Mills called originally about sunflower. I was like, yeah, I want to do it and we can do it, but I had never done it. So it was a little bit more stress. So I'm like, yeah, I know how buckwheat's grown. And then also because we had been doing that work for 4 years or so at the time, 5 years, I had the grower network now to reach out to. And I said, and they were like, yeah, I grow buckwheat, or do you want to grow buckwheat? And so they said yes. And I said, here's the catch. You have to get certified, regenerative certified. And so I knew their practices and what they were doing in, organically anyway. And I said, we got to get connected to the Soil Climate Initiative and get you signed up. And they're like, well, yeah, but it's going to take me a couple of years to get certified. And I said, no. I said, you can get certified in this year 1 because your farm is going to be baselined. And I said, you're doing all those tentative things that are important. So you just have to essentially attest your commitment, and then they're going to check in, right? So that is, for Pacha, I said, yeah, I can do this fast. We can do this fast because I have the growers who are authentically doing this. I selected the certification program that was best suited to get the immediacy of it. And then the processor, to answer that, I worked with the same processor we did for our sunflowers. So that was all in place. The catch was they had never done buckwheat, de-hulled. And so then I worked with another processor for short term up in Canada that had worked with us on hemp seed. and they were dehulling some buckwheat. So we did it up there first, and then we moved it back here into North Dakota at the primary facility. So that was really kind of a real fast, accelerate to a lot of acres. So we went from kind of my home farm to a couple thousand acres very quickly. Concerning though, because we have created a problem for ourselves, because Pacha is just using the buckwheat groat, and there's a lot of waste of the small particles and so forth, and we can make that into an awesome buckwheat flour. But hopefully, someone's listening out there in procurement for some big brand, we don't have the person calling right now saying, I need 5 truckloads a year of buckwheat flour. If they did, that solves for me the other part of the revenue side to make us whole, because actually right now we're doing this and we're actually losing money having that amazing customer and regenerating a couple thousand acres of buckwheat, and we're kind of losing money. We've got things in the works. We've got some sales that are starting in this area, but it's not easy, and there's, for us in the middleman, and whether it's me or another processor, aggregator, or supplier, they are taking risks too. I'm more willing to do that because our whole business is being built around it, that risk, and this idea of regenerative. But that also might explain why the adoption isn't huge right now, because the suppliers and the processors and the ingredient sellers today, they don't know if they can really do this because of the risk side.
Right. It's almost like the supply chain infrastructure is not set up for this new, I don't even want to call it decommoditized, but this more niche market that is developing. These little like side offshoot businesses, like you said, you got a buckwheat grow business opportunity, but now you got to figure out what to do it with the flour.
Yep. 100%.
So PSA, anyone who needs certified organic and certified SCI buckwheat flour, call John. You can contact him directly or ask us for his contact info.
Right. We got to call Bob's Red Mill, man. I mean, they got tons of buckwheat, right? They sell all sorts of buckwheat stuff.
They do. They would be fantastic as a customer. I think we would work very well together.
John, before you talk about the retailer, I want to ask one follow-up question to what you just laid down. And by no means do you need to reveal the actual unit economics. I'm just trying to ask a dumb question so I can understand kind of the algebra of putting this together. Do you talk to Pacha up front about like a unit price and say like, hey, we're going to buy 50-pound bags and we need the 50-pound bags to show up at XYZ dollars a pound or something. And then you have to backtrack with your growing operation, the other farmers and the processor to just make those unit economics work. And it's just like kind of basic backtracking algebra, or is the pricing and unit economics like development different than that?
I think it's a hybrid and it's a conversation. So this is really a great question, and it's a great, for me, it's critically important to have a dialogue. So, especially with the big customers, if I am lucky enough to get to the right procurement person who might buy buckwheat flour, and they say, okay, well, send me your spec and what's your full truckload pricing? If I send that to them cold like that, and I do it where I really want and should be to not lose as much money, or actually, break even, or God forbid, make money, I know that I'm going to be 25 to 50% out of market. And it's an immediate, I pay 5 cents less, see you later.
Yeah.
That's not a good fit, because that's a commodity buyer who isn't appreciating the value of it. The right conversation is, here's where we think the market is, or you tell me where the market is, because you've been buying from a non-regen source. Okay, it's $1.20, and I want to be at $1.75 to be whole. And oh my gosh, that's going to kill our cost of goods, and we can't get into these retailers because of it. And we have investors, etc. So then it's where is that? And then maybe you land at $1.50, right? So that's the dialogue, and then it's to say that's because I think I can sell the other parts of the co-product business, right. But these things need to be in balance. Same with sunflower, kernel versus oil, whole seed versus oil. meal versus oil. It all has to be in balance. And people that are, on the brand side, they don't really understand all of that nuance unless they're in that processor silo.
That really makes a lot of sense. And I'm curious to get your take on, the buyers who might be looking at a conventional regenerative crop, right? Are you really looking to sell based on like the altruistic benefits of this is a more sustainable crop, it's helping to mitigate climate change, it's utilizing less water, or has there been any specific nutrient density testing on this conventional regen ag product? And if so, is there a significant difference that can also be used to help to sell this product into these potential marketplaces?
Yeah. Let me cover one last thing on that point because it ties into this. The other point that I make to some of these larger customers who are interested in the regenerative side and they get price shock, maybe it's just, maybe it's just even commodity side where they want to support field theory because of the aspirational goal around supply chain being regenerative, but they don't really care about it. They don't have a market use for it right now to do on label, but they just like to buy from us, and then the price is too high. Pure commodity wheat, I'll make that one up. Yeah, we can go find you wheat from guys we know, but it's no one's going to make any money at that, and just keep buying from your wheat guy. The difference is, though, if we have a high value product that we offer and they want, or that we don't offer right now, but we can do for them, that's probably a better discussion because we've done it 2 times now, sunflowers and buckwheat, didn't do it and then delivered. I say, can you give me some of your commodity business and pay a penny more a pound? Because you use 10 million pounds of this flour. So if I'm involved in the brokerage side or commodity sourcing side and I can make a penny a pound, they're not going to miss it. They're making a commitment to me, but that might be, on an annual basis, that might be $20,000 of revenue that I can then subsidize the high value regenerative thing and bring that $1.50 price down to $1.30. Mm-hmm. So now we're within 10 cents of what their commodity play is because they gave me revenue opportunity on the other thing. So I lose money all the time. I'm looking at the aggregate. What is the company making across all this? Can we make a penny here? Maybe we can make 10 cents over there, and then maybe we're going to lose some money over here. But if we take this all together, does it help us accomplish our goal and get to a product that is sought after in market?
I think that's a beautiful way, because everybody constantly talks about the razor thin margins in farming, and you're literally advocating for 1 penny. You couldn't ask for a smaller figure to be paid in cash. So that's pretty astounding, and you painted a really good picture of like why that 1 penny can be so monumental, right? Because you're dealing with such huge quantities.
And I'll give you the facts. I had to learn this the hard way. But a lot of this stuff is straight up traded. We're sourcing from known sources now, and we're selling to long-term customers, right? So it's not like, hey, I need 10 truckloads of this and it's transactional, we're done. But the average margin for a broker is around 3%, maybe 5%. So that might be a penny, it might be 5 cents, sometimes it's 10, depending on the price of the unit. But the point is, it's really super slim margin. And most brands, if you guys said you're going to make 5% in your company, that's your margin, they're like, click, no way. Can't do it. What kind of horrible business model is that? So now I say, if your broker is just supplying you with this anyway, and they have no connection to the ingredient, we at least give a continuing guarantee and a value add, and we take ownership of it, pay for it, and then we sell it. So if we broker something, we're actually owning it and reselling it. And they don't do it because they don't take possession. That 3%, or in a good day, 5% that would come to us, what's the benefit that we're doing with that versus your standard broker that you might, love and is a great guy to take you out to dinner every once in a while, but it doesn't help you in the other, if you have aspirational things in the regenerative space. And there are, some regenerative brokers out there now, so I'm not diminishing that. The industry needs brokers. They're hugely important. I'm just saying, when we say no over here, let's look at the macro. You buy 15 other things, give us a little piece of this pie and maybe we can actually make this happen at a good commercial.
John, look into your crystal ball and say, like, what's the highest leverage, most transformational single thing that could happen to further develop these conventional regenerative markets? Is it that tying to nutrient density that Kyle mentioned? Is it labels like SCI and Regenified just being able to create a premium like what organic and rock has, and rocks really just has it because it's organic, right? Like, what's the thing that if the market decided it was going to happen, it was going to work? Because I think we largely see two paths. We see people making regenerative products that are premium and they're realizing the unit economics and the fact that they're selling a premium product, or we see mainly big multinational brands making regenerative commitments and trying to get farmers to adopt practices, but they're saying we're going to sell the same products at the same prices. So this additional, cost to the farmer is not going to end up in our unit economics, right? It's like, what's the rub there? I guess, like, what's the one thing that might break that down?
Well, Kyle actually asked a question last time. You brought up here again, nutrient density. I'm fascinated by nutrient density. The Nutrient Density Alliance, and I want to. If I could spend all day and just focus on that stuff, I would do it. I think probably this, and Tina Owens, she's helped with that white paper, and
she's the nutrition rock star of the world.
Yeah, I mean, she might be the smartest person I know. But so hats off to Tina.
Yeah.
If you're listening somewhere. But she makes this point really well in the study or the outcome of that white paper. I think the summation point was, look, we shouldn't be talking about regenerative. We should be talking about nutrient density, because to be nutrient dense, you're probably going to be regenerative. So I think that is probably right. I'm not going to dispute the findings of that paper, because I know a lot of work went into it, a lot of good discussion. I am fascinated about this, though, as a farmer, because I know every farm is different, and you're starting with different levels of fertility. God has blessed certain areas better than others. There's heavy metals in some areas and not in others. There's environmentals. And so the question that I don't understand is, around nutrient density is, if you talk about wheat, we're talking about usually protein. That's the measure of quality. Is it high protein wheat? And then what are the falling numbers of the wheat? Rye would be similar, oats possibly to our typical grains. That's how they're graded. And protein is the measure. So if I was doing everything right for 10 years, cover cropping the hell out of all this stuff, and I had great crop rotation, and then I grew wheat, would my protein level that year be the highest, or would it possibly be lower, just because it was too warm? It wasn't cold enough for wheat, and I got a low protein number. So I might have, what I'm saying is, we might have poor soils farmed in a terrible way that no one would like, and the protein that year as a quality measure might be better than the best organic or non-organic cover cropping, superstar.
Yeah.
So what are we measuring? Is it all the other stuff that, is outside of protein? The vitamins, the minerals, the amino acid profiles, and all these other things that make that up. But, we have to get a lot more data, in my opinion. And then what I fear is that we'll be marketing nutrient dense crops from soils that, aren't that good, but they're, for whatever reason, hitting nutrient dense profiles. And then there's a lot of really great farmers doing things in a great way. And then the measurement of their crop actually might not be what we would consider more nutrient dense.
Yeah.
I think generally, if you had to make anecdotal and general statement, the farming practices should support higher nutrient density. I emphatically believe that, but how the data comes about, I think, is decades to us.
John, I love and hate everything you just said for so many reasons. But in particular, and this is what I'm so grateful about to be, included in a podcast like this, is I get to learn so much. And as I've, what episode are we on? This is episode 90.
90. Mm-hmm.
In the 90 episodes of doing this, I keep realizing how complicated our food system is.
Yeah.
And the way you just spelled that out, because, let's take General Mills, for example, who sources oats from, I don't even know how many thousands of acres, hundreds of thousands of acres across probably the planet. So to your point, if they're focusing on nutrient density, are all of those different systems, even if they're using the exact same regenerative practices, going to yield the same, quote, level of superior nutrient density across the board? And the answer is obviously no, just because of different soil types, different climate systems, different, heat waves,
different
overuse
seed, different genetics.
Yeah, I mean, it's so complicated. So as much as, like, in my mind, my simple mind, I'm like, hey, just optimize for nutrient density and it solves the problem. But you just blew a hole in that theory, which is a very valid, you poked a good hole.
Well, I think so. Yes, you have summarized. It's a big problem when we talk about scale, because it's really easy to go in your garden, do everything amazingly awesome, and then you do it for 2 years, you got your soil, everything perfect, then you grow a tomato and you go take a tomato to the lab and it's the most amazing tomato ever. Yeah. But is it going to feed 200,000-300,000 people that way? So we have to have scale in mind. But yeah, I mean, things are complicated.
Okay, so we've spent a ton of time talking supply chain, farming practices, different markets, developing markets, and really got another rabbit hole. We are Regen Brands podcast, so let's bring it back to the brand. Tell us a little bit about your experience launching the brand Field Theory and what those retailer conversations have looked like. What have you learned in some of that process?
I'm gonna probably upset a lot of people again.
Yes, John.
We like that on the show, John. Don't worry about it. We got your back.
And I should have my wife on the podcast to talk about this. The CPG business, it's a horrible business. It is so horrible in a couple different ways. It costs so much money. It's so hyper competitive. And, then you get into distribution and you guys could have, what you're on 90 what? You could have probably 100 podcasts about the horrors of, brand distribution and all the challenges there.
John, I hate to interrupt you, but I need to know, just in one word, what's harder, to be a farmer or a CPG brand?
Equally, you probably lose more money in CPG. And you can lose a lot of money in farming really quick.
Wow. Okay, sorry to derail you. I just needed to get a hot take there. So continue on.
I would say the silver lining in the farming side, which supports it, is that you generally have assets.
Right.
Most people talk about, farmers become rich when they stop farming and sell their assets. Otherwise, they're just, losing money along the way. But, I'm self-funded, everything we've done. Right. And that's not really true. Like, my dad left me some money when he passed, unfortunately. And, hopefully I've used that for good purpose with my family and doing what we're doing here. But, at scale, it's me and it's my wife and our bank account trying to do this. I never wanted to go, people ask me a lot, like, well, are you funded? How do we invest and things like that? I've never wanted to take on all that money, although I would like to pay myself a nice salary. That would be great. And not live off of some savings. But I didn't want to be beholden to people dictating what we're doing, because this is so fast moving. I mean, when I started in 2016, 8 years ago, I think, it was all hemp, and I didn't know anything about anything of these other commodities that we're working with and specialty regenerative stuff. And, the term pivot, and I don't know how many times I would pivot. We would have done quite a few 360s for sure in that time. So, that's helped us be nimble and be immediately responsive to new opportunities. But, CPG is hard, right? You gotta, getting the product, and then, hopefully, it's a good product that you're making. It's differentiated and unique. And then you got, branding and packaging and all that. But then at the end of the day, you have to go in this horrible process of retailer by retailer, and whether you have a sales management team in-house or brokers, and you're knocking on doors and you're saying, and then it's like, yeah, send me samples. And then I had this vision of an office filled with hundreds of boxes, and did they even open the box of my sample, or did they just hand
Right.
it? And then, again, probably topics for many other podcasts. You get in the door, and then what's the sell through? What's the velocity? And so we went from one product, hemp hearts, to okay, we need the oil and the protein. It was everything we had in bulk. We can just put it in the CPG bag, and there it is. And so now at least we can go to a food show and we can have 5 SKUs, and we have organic and non-organic. But guess what? Hemp protein doesn't really turn in a bag, because there's all these blended proteins that you can put in your smoothie. Hemp seed oil, which I've marketed through Field Theory as a culinary oil, specialty oil, like an avocado or something like that, instead of how it had been marketed as in the health and wellness section in the refrigerated cooler with a really ugly brown bottle. But guess what? That didn't work really either, because not a lot of people know about hemp seed oil. So in the hemp SKUs of CPG, we were pushing hemp is good for you, hemp is good for you, hemp is good for you. And it's the same thing we were saying in the bulk side of the business. And a lot of people know that, and they buy bulk hemp from us and they put it in their formulas. And then I always try to introduce new innovative ways. Like, you have a pancake, why don't you put some hemp protein in there? You can do it. It doesn't have to taste gross. It can give you this protein bump. And then I said to myself, why aren't we demonstrating that in other products? So that was how the upcycled baking line started. I said, I want to have upcycling in there. I want to have hemp in there because it's demonstrative of the value of the hemp ingredient, and that was core to our business. And then I want it to taste really good and be different. And so that was, the pancake and then the chocolate muffin. And then I made a huge mistake because, again, I don't know anything about food, guys. I'm
You're just a farmer supplier brand, but none
yeah,
of us know anything about food. Is what I keep learning.
I'm just like an IT guy, and yeah. Anyway, little beknownst to me, pancakes and muffins, while you can bake them both, they sit in different categories. Okay, so now I have the brokers out there doing pitches on pancakes, pitches on muffins, and then they're like, "Oh, this is awesome! Tastes good. It's a great story. We want to support this." Yeah, guess what? Well, what other SKUs do you have for pancakes?
Right.
What's your line extension? And after 2 years of that, I kind of went back to, because our velocity wasn't very good in some of these areas, pulling the stuff back, SKU rationalization. So now we have pancakes, muffins, and then the hemp hearts in conventional and organic. So those are the 4 that we're really going to market with right now. As I said, we got the Kroger subsidiaries, the Kroger specialty brands, is picking us up about 350 stores. That's for pancake and muffin. And then the thing is, so what's next? How do we do the line extensions? And so now we want to build out, hopefully after the success there, we get that flywheel moving, and then we can build out the line extensions there. But not necessarily everything will have hemp in it. Not everything will be upcycled. The daunting task of being another tortilla chip on the aisle, haunts me. But I eat a lot of tortilla chips, and I would love to have that, in our brand. And there's things that you want to do, and then things that you should do. But basically, the other thing that I really wanted to do is, you hear retailers talking about their sustainability, regenerative, carbon reduction goals, all this kind of stuff, right? So I want them to have our attention somehow and know what we're doing in the middle to support all these brands that are on their shelves that they love, and they love what they're doing and how they're sourcing it. Well, guess what? They're sourcing it from us. And I would love for them to have knowledge of that, and then say, okay, let's bring this brand in, because they're so important to all the other brands that are on the shelf. And then
Mm.
more importantly, back to that dialogue, if these sustainability, regenerative goals, carbon reduction, whatever you call them, are important to them, let's partner and say, look, we only have one pancake mix. We only have one muffin mix. You know, we probably shouldn't do blueberry because I'm not that smart, but I know that there's in most stores there's like 4 brands of blueberry muffins. So what kind of muffin number 2 do you want? And we'll go create it. And we are so small that we can create this stuff and have it to market in like 3 to 5 months. I
Mm.
mean, super, super fast. So if we get the right retailers who want to support this stuff, that's how I want to build out our line extensions for those initial products.
I think it's a great call. The collaborative innovation route. Start small with a handful of close retailers who believe in the mission, get some input, and develop what they want to see to differentiate themselves to have success in that initial marketplace. And then you've got some sort of tried and tested unit you can take elsewhere, right? So I think that's a brilliant model and move. Um, so just commend you for that idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, that I can't even understand your frustration, John. I don't want to speak for you, so feel free to correct me if you feel differently. But like my perspective as the person listening to all these people and kind of aggregating the opinion or the assessment or whatever is like regenerative today economically has been a good win. Like it's made the rich richer, like the rich that were already regenerative and we could easily slap the label on and Whole Foods could make the claim. Like it was great for them because there really wasn't any change and there was no real cost and there's no real building that occurred. But people at the vanguard that are really building and really have skin in the game and maybe haven't made a ton of money or aren't super profitable from it yet have yet to really see the multi-stakeholder buy-in from retailers, distributors, processors, whoever, depending on what stakeholder they are, that they deserve. And look, that's just free market capitalistic society. Like that's what we live in. There's a degree of that we can't control. And I think one thing we're always trying to ask ourselves is like, what's the proper way for us to advocate for that without really asking for charity? And then get specific enough with like whatever the advocacy or requests are so we actually can change some stuff. Like instead of saying, we need to have these more conversations. It's like retailers should take 3% less margin on regenerative products. Like we need to codify it and make it programmatic. And we still are not anywhere near doing that. So,
Well, one of the biggest challenges that I see again, sitting from, the brand side is one thing, that's a broker calling, sampling, and buyers, right?
mm-hmm.
Or brand curators. And then there's the whole private label business, which is more aligned with our sourcing side. And we work with some co-packers, right? And so we'll get calls. This really large retailer that does a lot of private label, they want 20,000 bushels worth of ROC certified oats,
Mm.
and they want to do a packing run in 3 months. Can you do it?
Mm.
And I'm like doing math, right? And then I'm like, and this is a couple years ago.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, I can do it. I can, I know where half of that is, and then I can probably find the other, but I don't really think there's a lot more. And then they say, oh yeah, by the way, this is just like in the oat flake, and then they want quick oats and steel cut and a couple more oat, and they all want to be. And I said, well, what's the volume in that? Well, 20,000 each. I was like, okay, so now we're talking about over 100,000 bushels of ROC oats. And I said, I guarantee you that does not exist in the world.
Mm.
And so, to my point earlier about the adoption of ROC, great job in their marketing branding people. And so now this particular retailer who's doing private label, they're all in on it. They're like, I want to buy everything and I want everything to be. But that just illustrates that they don't understand the practicality of the supply chain.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I think about the other labels. So, well, maybe if they weren't so fixated on organic, they could look at every single one of their SKUs being regenerative certified in that private label brand. And that would be hundreds and hundreds and thousands of acres of different crops and commodities that could be tooled, change the farming practice, get the certification, and do it. And we can't do it in 1 year, but we could probably do a lot of it in 2.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's sort of the education side up the stack. And then, the last thing on that point is the private label buyer, they don't know anything about the shelf brand sourcing people. So
Mm-hmm.
if they're talking to us through an intermediary of a co-packer or something like that, but if we're in
Right.
the discussion and they're saying, hey, oh, this is great, we can get regenerative oats in our private label brand, and then the buyer, when we come along and let's say we put oats in a bag um, on the shelf, because they want to
Branded.
branded,
Mm-hmm.
we could give them a hell of a deal, right? Because
Right.
I'm making all this money supplying the commodity for the private label, and then I'll put it on the shelf almost for free, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
and our brands should have more value because they know that that's also a regenerative play. But
Mm-hmm.
no, there are other established players there. And the main point is in those big companies, they don't talk to each other.
Right.
The this buyer is segregated from this buyer and that buyer.
Hmm.
And then the sustainability people, they're probably like in 52
Yeah.
offices down the hall, and they're not in the important buying meetings.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. I want to reiterate something that you've mentioned twice now, and just about the scale of 1.5, roughly 1 to 2% of all arable land in the world is organic, right? And to your point, making that 1 to 2% 50% better by making it regenerative organic, or providing some level of market validation for conventional regenerative products and making that other 98.5 or 98% of all arable land maybe 10 to 20% better,
That's right.
and the potential positive benefits that can have both from a human nutrition perspective, a mitigating climate change perspective, a water utilization perspective is tremendous. So just wanted to zoom out and hone in on at the same time
And Kyle,
one of
you
those things.
you left out the most important thing. The impact that would be to the guys and gals who are producing the food, the farmer.
Yeah.
We're going to get another check. Well, that's great that we're getting a check and it's going to help us lose less money this year. But I'd rather sell a specialty crop that's regenerative verified in my conventional system and not need that check.
Mm-hmm.
So that is another just hugely critical thing. The farmers want other things to grow. How is the food industry at large going to
Mm-hmm.
give them other things to grow? And then another huge point that came up in my mind when you were talking about some other things is the importance of in this commodity play where we might make a penny, but we get the business. So then it's a shift of, where is that supply coming from? And how important is, I like to talk about North American grown because Canada is so
Right.
hooked in and such an awesome, value trading partner, and Mexico too. So if you think of North America versus foreign, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have a huge patriotic energy in this country, no matter what political side of the aisle you're on right now. And, why aren't we using more uh, food grown in our own country?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Farmers, ethanol system got built the way it is. You can have a mix of clean energy, green energy, ethanol is part of it, nuclear is part of it, all that. But if we start taking that away and we start moving away from ethanol, what are the farmers going to do? They're growing corn and they're going to grow, stupidly, myself included, we're going to grow corn every year, no matter how much money we're going to lose on it
Mm-hmm.
in some way.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to give them something else to grow. And there's a lot of things grown around the world, and there's a lot of companies that are using foreign sourced ingredients, and they're doing it for a lot of different reasons. Either they can't get it reliably here, or they need to meet a cost of goods. But let's work with them and start blending that. So if they're buying 90% of something from over there, we can grow it here. We can grow anything here pretty much. So let's start having a conversation with them around a certain percentage is North American grown.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you just answered the final question there, John. And like most episodes, the whole episode's probably an answer to the question. But my summary of what you just said there is like the food industry and the government need to create a pathway for farmers to grow food and grow it regeneratively, right? Like there's kind of a double and linked impetus there.
100%.
But super informative conversation, man. This has been awesome. I will take us home with the final question, which you're happy to expound whatever else is left that we haven't covered yet. How do we get Regen Brands to have 50% market share by 2050?
Just get started. Every brand owner has ingredients that they buy, and just get started. That's what I'd say to my farming friends too. I talk to them about organic, and I say, you don't have to convert your whole farm. It's probably impossible from a physical labor perspective. Start with 1% of your 1,000-acre farm, then move it to 10. Maybe you never go over 10, but get started. Capture some additional value, diversify. We talk about diversity in investing, talk about diversity in cultures and people. Why are we not being diverse in our sourcing models? And it's hard work. It's paradigm shifting. Sometimes it's more expensive in the short term, but not the long term. And there's companies out there now to help them do that. So let's get started.
John raised his hand. Yeah,
he put his hand in the air. Companies, yeah, we're here. John, I love that answer, and it actually reminds me.
Do that. Okay.
Yeah, it reminds
unless they're
me
watching on YouTube, which is some people. Sorry,
some people do that. Who's got time to watch? I mean, no. For those who do it, awesome, great. I just, I look terrible in front of my screen all the time. Anyway, really like that answer. Just start. And I think it actually reminds me of something Christy Lewis said, who AC, was that episode 1?
That was episode 1. So 1 to 90 linkage.
Yeah, we're going like full circle here, literally. Yeah. And if memory serves correct, what Christy talked about is like, look at the LOI. And if you can't afford to go full regen on your primary ingredient, find something else down the list and reach out and work with that supply chain and just go one by one. So I think it's a great concept, and it doesn't have to be, AC mentioned this to me when we first met. It's like progress over perfection. You don't have to be 100% rock today. Can you get one ingredient to be conventional regenerative? So it's a great answer. And I really think that's what will move the needle, is just starting to transition.
Yep. 100%.
This has been amazing, man. Thanks so much for joining us. A great way to kick off the year. Really appreciate you.
Thank you guys so much. I appreciate everything you do. I love all the brands that are plugging into you and getting voices on your platform, and just so appreciative. Thanks again.
Absolutely. Appreciate you, John. Thanks, man.
For transcripts, show notes, and more information on this episode, check out our website, regen-brands.com. That is regen-brands.com. You can also check out our YouTube channel, Regen Brands, for all of our episodes with both video and audio. The best way to support our work is to give us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast platform and subscribe to future episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. You can also subscribe to our newsletter, the Regen Brands Weekly, and follow our Regen Brands LinkedIn page to stay in the know on all the latest news, insights, and perspectives from the world of regenerative CPG. Thanks so much for tuning into the Regen Brands podcast. We hope you learned something new in this episode, and it empowers you to use your voice, your time, your talent, and your dollars to help us build a better and more regenerative food system. Love you guys.